Welcome, everyone. I am so excited to be joined today by my friend Pallas K. Augustine. Thank you, Pallas, for being here.
Hi, Gray. Good to see you as always.
Yeah, we are meeting today because of what a powerful astrological time period we're living in, and specifically this week and these particular days that you and I are talking right now, because there
Yeah.
is a triple conjunction happening between Venus and Mars and the Sun in Capricorn, with all of them
hmm
coming together within 1 degree. So we just had a Venus Sun conjunction with Mars within 1 degree of them. Yesterday we had a Venus Mars conjunction. Tomorrow we have a Mars Sun conjunction, and they're all within a degree of one another across these three conjunctions.
Loud. It's very loud.
Yeah, very loud. Yeah, it's shown up with huge current events.
hmm
People's personal lives are also, I'm sure, very eventful. And these are cycles that I personally love to work with in my own practice. And you're an astrologer that I know is also really into cycles. And these particular cycles in particular, you've done a lot of work around. And I know you have a workshop right now that is being released about the Venus Sun conjunction in Capricorn and how people can relate to that. And you also put out worksheets about Moon Venus alignments through your Patreon. But yeah, so people that are not familiar with you,
hmm
be great if you could, yeah, introduce yourself and your work and how to get in touch with you
Yeah.
and everything.
Thanks, Gray. Love to be here. Always good to talk to you. We've been doing this for like a decade, almost a decade now, which is wonderful.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I mean, the Venus cycle, anyone who does know me knows the Venus cycle is my favorite. But the Mars cycle is also very important, especially to, I find, my health and just my general energy. And these times when Mars is crunchy are tend to be a little crunchy, and so I definitely pay attention to them. And of course, we're both active in magic and devotion, and these are really important times I find for people who have a devotional orientation with the planets.
Mm.
And I think the my work with the Venus cycle, my personal work with the Venus cycle started a very long time ago, and I've been devotionally tracking it for almost a decade now. And then publicly, I started offering Venus retrograde workbooks in the 2021-22 Venus retrograde in Capricorn. And so there's this kind of mirror to now.
Nice. Yeah.
And then this year, I am offering a workshop for this particular conjunction, not just the retrogrades. And it really is it's the moment between retrogrades. And so, if anyone watching is thinking about Venus's retrograde coming up at the end of 2026, thinking about this moment now in Venus's cycle is a really beautiful way to sort of gently prepare yourself, I think, for that retrograde. So yeah. I'm on Patreon like you are. At slash Nine of Wands. You can just look for my name, Pallas K. Augustine. I have a website, which is nineofwands.com, which is where you can find the workshop. It's only open until January 17th for registration when Venus leaves Capricorn, but there will be some special stuff coming out after that too, related to Venus's cycle. And yeah, and then there's also uh, Idolus Stellarum, which you have to type that out. It is where I spend time talking with people about astrological magic with my mage psychotherapist spouse Rain. So that is a really beautiful way to orient the planets through my work also. Yeah, happy to
Yeah.
be
And
here.
yeah. And this is a really, like you're saying, one of the reasons I find these alignments so powerful is to, yeah, really any kind of devotional ritual practice, really using them for your own types of inner exploration and illumination and insights and clarification. They can be very powerful. And the more you get into tracking these cycles and alignments, they're just so powerful with storylines
Oh
and what
yeah.
happens in people's lives and relationships, whether or not they even know they're happening. Like if you go
Yeah.
back over your life, it's always pretty incredible, like
Hmm.
how all of that lines up. So yeah, getting that
Mm.
workshop and he said it's until January 17th. That was part of
Mhm.
wanting
It's
to.
called the disaster of love.
Okay.
And it's kind of mini guided ritual, mini writing retreat. So it's 2 hours. It's you're going to be actively writing and reflecting. So it's based on a model very popular in creative writing worlds where the person is holding space for actual writing to happen. And so you're given prompts and then you do your writing in sort of a timed period. And this one is all about forests. We're going to go to your favorite forest. We're going to hang out with Venus and the Sun. I don't want to say too much about it, but just in case people watch this after and are sad they can't get it. But
Yeah.
for those of you watching before, it is explicitly to kind of make you take a moment to track this moment and just check in with yourself and where you are right now. So even if you're watching this outside of that, it's worth looking back into your journals, your photo rolls, your text messages, your inboxes, just seeing like what was happening around these days when we're recording this, the 7th to the 10th of January 2026, and seeing what was up and like making some special notes and doing some reflecting on this very moment because it is a
Mm.
potent one for reasons that we will get into.
Yeah, and being new cycle, all three planets having new cycles, at the same time is what's so powerful. Just because the Venus Sun conjunction alone, the Mars Sun conjunction alone, the Venus Mars cycle
With the
alone, they're
Jupiter
always.
opposition.
And then, yeah, there's also Jupiter opposite all of them at the same time. So this is a chart for January 8th. This is today that you and I are talking. And you can see here with this Capricorn region circled, Venus, Mars, and the Sun are all within 1 degree of one another. And if you're aware of how fast all these cycles move, what this means is Venus is barely separating from her recent conjunction with the Sun and her conjunction with Mars, and the Sun is moving into the exact conjunction with Mars right now. And so the specific dates were January 6th, we had Venus beginning a new cycle. We'll talk a little bit more about this being the superior conjunction, but essentially she's moving from having previously been a morning star into eventually emerging into light again as an evening star. But this is a moment of the rebirth and reanimation, the purification, this seeding of a new cycle that just happened. And that was happening at the same time Mars is ending a cycle. And then on January 7th, for some of you, maybe it was January 8th with your time zone, Venus and Mars then came together exactly. And we're going to have a lot more to say about the Venus Mars cycle later in this video. But as Pallas already mentioned, later this year, October, November, we have a Venus retrograde in Scorpio and Libra. That's really important that the Mars cycle will be connected to you. And a year from now, in the beginning of 2027, Mars will be retrograde and Venus connects to that. So across the next year and even beyond, the next year and a half or more, this Venus Mars cycle starting right now with the Venus and Mars cycles also starting right now is just incredibly powerful. It's aligned with a lot of the big movements we're going to have in the year ahead. And then on January 9th, we have the new Mars cycle beginning. And you can see even when this new Mars cycle begins, Venus is still within a degree of both of them. And as you were just mentioning, Jupiter is opposite all of this. So they're all lined up together in this really powerful way. And also interesting, and at these points of the cycles, we can't see Mars and Venus, but because Jupiter's retrograde opposite the sun, this is like the brightest
Brightest, so
Jupiter
bright.
Jupiter gets.
Yeah, around midnight, Jupiter will be right
Yeah.
high in the sky.
Yeah. So
Mm.
anything you would just like to say about some of the reasons you find these cycles
Mm.
so powerful?
Well, I think specifically for the Venus-Mars cycle, it's one I like to think about in my teaching because it's pretty easy for people to connect with, in part because people are already aware of the signs that Venus and Mars individually rule are always in opposition to one another, right? So it's like Libra is in opposition to Aries and Taurus is in opposition to Scorpio. And so you have this oppositional relationship between Venus and Mars, and thus, of course, them both being night sect planets, they have so much in common as well. And there is this really robust way that you can just like think about the Venus and Mars cycle, think about those houses in your natal chart that Venus and Mars rule, and then go from there in terms of what you're thinking of, in terms of the stories that you're tracking, in terms of how events of the world that align with these cycles end up relating with your own life. And this is, yeah, it's just a really it's really grabbable because it feels quite human-sized as far as a planetary cycles, as far as planetary cycles go.
Mm. Yeah, so for those watching that, know your natal chart, you know the houses ruled by Venus and Mars and those particular life topics, like you're saying, those particular themes and life topics might be particularly really up for new awareness and
Yeah.
insight and that sort of new movement and change and that sort of thing with this happening right now.
Yeah, and I think there's I feel like it's almost a cliche at this point to talk about letting go, but there is a kind of hearth fire piece of this that I think we'll talk about eventually when we get to that quote of Demetra's. But this kind of this offering up moment is a very important part of the moment we're in now, where Venus and Mars are together and then also conjunct the sun. And I think one of the main things, and this is mainly what we talk about in the workshop, what we explore in the workshop, is Venus being our values and Mars having this really strong relationship with our guided actions, right? With our like soul level guided actions, and being able to think about Mars Venus coming together as this renewal of alignment between our values and and our actions. And I think that's so important for our collective moment, and just that's always important for our personal relationships, of course. But I think there's a real call in this moment to do that kind of work, and also like find where the misalignments are, and possibly like give up those things that are creating the circumstances that are allowing those misalignments to flourish and getting in the way of our actions.
And one of the things we'll talk about here in a moment that would really make that especially powerful at this point is that Venus and Mars are being purified and being reanimated by the sun. So they're both in conditions of something being burned off and purged and purified, and also having this sort of inner illumination and reanimation that can really bring about change. And that purification can then be brought into the alignment of their new cycle. So it really is powerful.
Yeah.
I like the way you talked about aligning values and action. That's a similar way to how I think about it. So even in a more general way, even if you don't know your natal chart very well or what
Mhm.
houses Venus and Mars rules, every single
Yep.
time Venus and Mars comes together, I feel like we are personally and collectively even going through these types of processes. And like you mentioned, they are ruling opposite signs. They're both part of the night team in terms of being these nocturnal night planets, but they do have very different meanings in a lot of ways. So, like you're saying, the values of Venus, what you consider beautiful or pleasurable, or what you want to attract, what you want to create, what you desire, and lining that up with Mars, which can definitely also involve desire, but also very much like you're saying, like action, like taking action, fighting for something, protecting for something, what you want to protect, what you really want to courageously go after and pursue. And so their combination can be a real, yeah, reset and renewal of this for all of
Yeah,
us right now.
I
Yeah.
like to say that Mars is how we fight and Venus is why.
That's a really good way to put
Yeah.
it. Totally.
Yeah.
So one thing we could do you want to start with looking a little bit at just the superior conjunction side of
Yeah, sure.
how they're coming together? So this is a graphic, one way to look at the Venus cycle, which is showing the fact you can see Earth on the bottom. This is symbolizing the sun and the fact that the Earth is orbiting
Beautiful.
around the sun. And this circle, around the sun is just sort of showing how Venus orbits in between the Earth and the sun. Down at the bottom where it says inferior conjunction, that is not the conjunction of Venus we're having right now. There are two conjunctions that Venus forms with the sun during the Venus cycle, and the inferior one, which would be down there on the bottom when Venus is closest to Earth, in between Earth and the sun. That's when Venus is retrograde. So, what we're experiencing right now is Venus having moved through the entire morning star phase and is now moving direct, is moving fast, and is on the other side of the sun from us. And that's what's at the top of this image at that superior conjunction. What you also see in this image are these cocooned images and flying insects, emerging out of those cocoons, which is showing the period of gestation and incubation and purification and really metamorphosis and transmutation that we go through around these conjunctions. Because when Venus is not visible, and whether we'll talk about whether or not Venus is actually visible in your location or not, or this particular part of the Venus cycle. We talk about in astrology this sort of ideal symbolism and a particular degree range, which is often used as 15 degrees of a planet being under the beams of the sun on either side, and this being a period of the planet symbolically going through this purification of being close to the beams of the sun, being reanimated at the superior conjunction, and then eventually emerging into visibility again as that evening star. And then I just in contrast to that, the Mars cycle, like the Jupiter cycle and the Saturn cycle, there is only one conjunction between Mars and the Sun in the Mars cycle, which is what is pictured here on the left. Again, though, like Venus right now, Mars is on the other side of the Sun from us, moving fast, moving direct. And similarly, here, there's an image of a bear hibernating in a cave. So, again, sort of this hibernating, incubating period that's going to bring about some type of transmutation and purification change with Mars. And then it'll be like a bear coming out of the cave when Mars is emerging back into visibility. And then if we just brought in Jupiter, Jupiter would be at that other side of this image on the right, retrograde, and actually as close as Jupiter gets to us in the Jupiter orbit, very bright. So if we had a better image of outer space, we'd see them all lining up together. But Venus and Mars on that far side of the sun from us right now. But yeah, is there anything about this, and maybe even if you want to distinguish a little bit more about the Venus
Mm.
conjunctions with how you approach this, and the fact that we're having these superior conjunctions of them together right now?
Yeah, I think the biggest distinction to pull out when we're comparing the Mars cycle and the Venus cycle is thinking about how they move differently and how this makes them relate to the sun differently. So at the superior conjunction, Venus is direct and she's fast, right? So Venus is moving with the sun and actually overtakes the sun versus
Mm,
when she's retrograde and slow. And so Venus and the sun are actually going in opposite directions. And so
hmm
Venus ends up she's backtracking when she's retrograde, right? And so having this distinction and understanding that like when we're talking about a conjunction, when we're talking about this 15-degree aspect in terms of this under the beams period, when Venus is direct, this period is very long because Venus and the sun are quite similar speeds, just generally. And so Venus and the sun, it's just like a very slow movement forward where Venus finally overtakes. And so she's invisible. And I mean, we'll get in more into invisibility, but for like about 2 months almost, versus in the inferior conjunction, when she's retrograde, when she's slow, when Venus and the Sun just are passing ships with each other. It's a very brief period that she's actually invisible. It's like maybe a week and sometimes not at
Hmm.
all, technically. But
Right.
versus if you look at Mars, we can see here that Mars is also moving very fast at this conjunction point, but because Mars is typically slower than the sun, this is also this period where Mars is fast, they're catching up to, well, the sun overtakes Mars in this moment,
Hmm.
right? So even though Mars is fast, the sun is still faster and overtakes Mars. And so I think there's this like at this moment, Venus going from a morning star visible before sunrise, moving to an evening star visible after sunset. She moves and overtakes the sun and gets away, right? Versus Mars is the one in this circumstance who is overtaken and moves from being an evening star to a morning star. And that's just like such an interesting um,
Mm.
such an interesting moment to be in the middle of because it's like these planets are meeting and going in different directions.
Totally. And another thing with that too, although the superior conjunction side is really drawn out, like you're saying, so it's a much more extended process, and it can definitely be a process that can be take people into their depths, and it can definitely feel like a dark night of the soul
Yeah.
type of quality. Yet, like you were saying, something about the combination of the stationing, intensifying a degree, moving backwards, retrograde, Venus and the Sun coming together, like mutually applying to one another, even though it's not as long, it's also Venus, so close to us in orbit. There's just this kind of extreme quality. The catharsis of the retrograde inferior conjunction can be incredibly intense and
Yeah.
extreme in ways that are often beyond what the how the superior conjunction can feel. At least I often find.
Yeah, I was just writing about this yesterday,
Mm.
but to me I was trying to come up with a goofy analogy, and the inferior conjunction which is really fast happening when she's retrograde, it's like it's giving soap opera cliffhanger a little bit. Like it's really dramatic, it's so personal, it's intimate, things are happening. It'll make a good story someday, even if it's heartbreaking right now. But the superior conjunction really is just as potent in terms of this metamorphosis process, this regeneration process Venus goes through. But the superior conjunction, because it's so drawn out, it's sort of like the drama we have with our like never-ending laundry pile, right? It's like we have to do all this like soul searching on top of continuing to do the laundry. But like the real data, it really brings out like what is getting in the way of our like day-to-day inhabiting ourselves and our like honesty in our relationships and honesty in our crafts and all these things. So it's like the superior conjunction to me is is almost brings more Venus gifts than the retrograde conjunction does, in terms of clarity, especially that illumination, that purifying process. It's painful, and it can be painful for quite a while.
Totally. I know Errol Gutman in her work talks about the morning star being more the Aphrodite Pandemos, and the
Mm,
evening star, which we're heading towards being more like the Aphrodite Urania, like the
mm,
heavenly Urania. And I definitely have always think about these with Mercury and Venus, that this one of Venus, because it's like she's so far away and she's on the other side of the sun from us, and she's going to end up becoming an evening star. It does have this more celestial type of
mm.
quality. In both
Yeah.
cases, there's definitely an underworld process
Yes,
that we're
100%.
all going through. But that inferior one has even more of the amped up kind of tonic,
Yeah.
purging underworld type of quality often than the like you're saying, that the superior can often be a lot. Those gifts of Venus can really often come in perhaps more readily as part of it.
Mhm. And the superior ones tend to, I find, they're good stories, but they're good stories like 8 years later, Like they're not necessarily good stories while they're happening. They just look like doing the work and figuring things out and like these journeys of ourselves and our most intimate relationships and our work and our ideas of justice and like all of these important things that Venus is involved in. And in the moment, it might not really look like a good story, which is why I think they're so good for journaling these moments. Because it's
Absolutely,
like,
yeah.
and just paying some attention. And of course, this is a very good practice to be in with Mercury's synodic cycle, right? Of
Hmm.
paying attention to those moments when Mercury meets with the sun, both while retrograde and also while direct, because it's like the seeds are always planted during those direct moments. Like Mercury's on the far side of the sun. Like this is super magical and like yeah, and then like bringing it home, right? And so being connected into these processes with these planets, I think especially in a even light devotional way, like attention is part of all of this. And so even people just by watching this are tuning into this cycle and are paying attention to this cycle. And like I definitely think attention changes things. Yeah, so these moments are juicy from a meaning making and a like things really happening framework, but it often takes retrospect to be able to see why the superior conjunctions are important because they are sort of slower and more onerous.
Yeah, they're a longer drawn out process, and that's the
Hmm.
case with Mars too, because
Hmm.
Mars and Venus, they're both sort of
Yeah.
just traveling with the sun for months really, whereas that Venus retrograde as well as the Mercury retrograde is much faster, and I think that often, yeah, like you're saying though, the events can often be louder. With that to say though, there's often big loud events happening
Hmm.
with the superior conjunction,
Yeah.
in world events and personal events. So
Yeah. Yeah.
definitely
I think
happens on both
especially right
sides.
now with the Mars Venus cycle starting at the same point as their own synodic cycles starting. Um, yeah, and when this is happening, and this is very like superior conjunction coded to be faced with events that really put us up against our own values and how we're embodying our values and enacting them in the world and in our relationships. And I think we see that often with Venus Mars conjunctions in world events, and then this one with the sun so involved as well. It's really bringing it home, I think, for a lot of people.
And one thing too about this, maybe I'll go back for a moment to this, is that as they're all coming together right now in Capricorn, that is the exaltation of Mars,
Yeah.
which is really important as part of this. But that's also that earthy domicile of Saturn. And as if this triple conjunction would be powerful enough, but the fact that the Lord of Capricorn is Saturn, moving within 3 degrees of a conjunction with Neptune at the very, very end of Pisces, as we're on the cusp and threshold of a new Saturn Neptune cycle happening on February 20th, like the first degree of the zodiac. But the fact that it's Saturn combined with Neptune just makes this so much even more extreme right now. And I do think there is this great testing of values and really solidifying that, like you're saying, and then thinking of how to use that as, I guess, to me, I would think about it as like a sort of moral compass to guide yourself across the stormy seas we are going to be finding ourselves continually within with this, Saturn Neptune combination, especially in this period we're talking about right now, while they're both still in Pisces at the inception of these cycles.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I think that's so true. And this being the very end, like we've already gotten a little glimpse of Saturn in Aries, right? And this is the very last glimpse we get of Saturn in Pisces. And just having these two planet cycles infused with this like last gasp, right, of Saturn and Neptune in Pisces feels, yeah, it feels super clarifying in terms of how Saturn has enacted itself over the past couple years and how Neptune has influenced things over the last 14. So, yeah, these
Mm.
planets making this move now feels and yeah, and there's things that'll happen in Pisces with the Mars-Venus cycle that we'll come to, and the fact that they both have like a beautiful relationship with Pisces themselves. There's a lot of sympathy happening here, even though the planets themselves are in a moment, having a
Yeah,
moment.
absolutely. So going back to this, what you're also saying here about clarifying the values and you'll see different diagrams of the cycle. In this one, we have a cocoon, like I mentioned with Mars. Got a
I love the bear.
hibernating bear here.
I love that.
Yeah. And this is because there is this period of the planet being so close to the sun where they go invisible in their phase, and this can actually vary. And sometimes, like we were mentioning, Venus can be so extreme that Venus she doesn't actually even really go invisible at certain times because of latitude and stuff. But we think about, though, even in those cases, it's you'd have to really get somewhere special to see Venus. So just being able to be out in your daily life, moving around without climbing up to some special place to get a special viewing of the horizon, you're generally not going to really. This 15-degree range, I feel like, is not just a symbolic ideal, but it's a fairly decent range of, just being out on the street and looking up at the sky and whether or not you're going to be able to actually see them or not. And so as the solar conjunction approaches, and Venus is on this side. In this case, like you said, she's moving towards the sun, or in this case of Mars, it's the sun coming to Mars within 15 degrees and then getting closer and closer and closer. And into this moment now where they're all within a degree, there is this death of an old cycle. There is this, they're burning up in the sun. There is this purging, purification, catharsis. And this is that powerful quality, I think, that you're speaking to when you're talking about then this really powerful reassessment of your values and how that can align with these new cycles coming in.
Yeah, and I think visibility is such a beautiful way to connect with the planets. Um, Whether you have a robust personal astrology practice or not, simply attending to when these planets are morning stars or evening stars, recognizing that these outer planets are so bright. That's when they're brightest in the night sky, and when we can see them the most clearly for the longest at night when they're at that opposition point. I think it's a very unifying process collectively for humans to engage in. And that's definitely part of the reason why it can be so personally impacting as well. But I think there is something about rising literacy, say in Venus's cycle, especially in terms of like, and just thinking about like what's happening in her cycle and more broadly, which we won't get into today, but which is very interesting. And thinking about this, like, uh, yeah, this way that Venus brings us together even when she's struggling. And I think her cycle is such a beautiful way for us to relate to that on a really fairly casual way. And that 15 degrees is really, even if you're in like the middle of a city, you can like maybe catch Venus out the window when she's an evening star in the evening without even going out of your way. And I just think that's like
Hmm.
really beautiful.
So with that, this slide here is going a little bit into this concept of under the beams of the sun. This is actually from a talk I previously did about heliacal rising and setting planets when they become visible. But just as you were just speaking about whether or not in your location you can see Venus or Mars has a lot to do with a lot of different factors, their own latitude relative to the path of the sun, just like where you are, the like speed of the signs rising, what sign they're in. And so there's all sorts of different factors that in the local environment, are going to really vary from place to place, and what degree range, you'd actually be able to see Venus and Mars. And as we are just talking about with this 15-degree range, in especially the Hellenistic astrology era, this 15 range really became accepted as an ideal. And something that was helpful for me to understand this was some ideas from Robert Schmidt talking about it in terms of like a Platonic ideal, even that there's sort of like this, separate from the real manifested form in the material realm of when you could actually see the planet, that there's this sort of eternal ideal of this concept that could relate to this 15-degree range that became really commonly used. Antiochus in the first century talks about planets being really significant, this phasis intensifying condition that can even bring prominence to people when a planet is moving within this 15-degree range within 7 days of birth. But even in the Hellenistic astrology era, as well as in other lineages of astrology, this 15-degree range is not universal. Firmicus Maternus mentioned 15 degrees for Saturn, but 12 for Jupiter, 8 degrees for Mars and Venus, and then giving more 18 degrees for Mercury, since Mercury is harder to see. This 8-degree range for Venus can actually be, I think, a pretty good range for when it actually can happen. I've seen Freedom Cole in his Science of Light book in Vedic astrology cite a 9-degree range. I know Adam Gainsbourg, who did a lot of work with the Venus cycle, has like a 10 to 12-degree range he seems to like to use. So it can really vary. But like we're talking about, there is this 15-degree range that we just end up using in astrology pretty commonly.
Yeah, and one of my favorite ways to track the Venus's cycle is with Peter at AstroSeek's Venus Cycle Calculator. I have a blog post on my blog, so it's a guide to it that's linked. And that is what they use there. They actually show the rising and setting, and we can take that as um, a fairly generous dates. And so if you are using that calculator as like a very accessible tool to think about this stuff and to think about Venus's visibility, always give yourself like a few days, especially if you're in an urban environment. You might even need up to a couple weeks to be able to see it, because so much of this stuff does depend on local conditions, right? And it can even depend Venus's apparitions, which is like the shape of her rise and fall as a morning star, evening star, also depends on like the very latitude that we're at on the planet. Can like the shapes of those can change depending where we are, if we're in the northern or southern hemisphere. And so being both attentive to the symbolic relevance of the 15 degrees, I think, or whatever you end up deciding to go with in your own practice, I think is really helpful. And then also just developing a relationship with your own horizon and where you typically
Mm.
will be able to see the sunset or the sunrise, or when you're looking at up above and what stars you can see, and using those stars as a reference point for like your own understanding what your own visibility is can be really helpful in terms of applying the technique, if you're using it, into your actual sky, because they will be different depending on where you are and what sky you're working with.
So as Venus then, or Mars in both cases, as you know, they're within this 15-degree range, but then as they come closer and closer and closer into this moment, there's this other term that's often used in astrology of the planets being combust or burning up. Again, like we just saw with that 15 or 8 range, there's all sorts of degree ranges that get used for combustion. Sometimes like 8 or 8.5 can be kind of common, but this honestly can really vary. And again, you'll see different things going for different planets. But we
Mhm.
have this concept where because we're seeing the planet is getting so close to the sun, it's sort of like this, the rays of the sun are overcoming the planet sort of burning up in this fiery purification process. Yeah, how do you like to talk about that process? That
Mm.
this is what we've been basically going through. We're in this special moment
Mhm.
right now of the conjunction, but as far as that leading into the conjunction, what are some ways that you like to talk about that?
I mean, this is why the sun is king, right? And I just love that, like, supposedly before people even knew about heliocentrism, which it's like people knew about heliocentrism way before we think they did in the West. But yeah, I think there's something really really special about thinking about that, and um like the visit to the king, right? It's like think about like all of the security you have to go through and like all of the um all of the like baggage checks and like all of the, I mean, I've never visited a king. But I think that I can imagine the kind of security and the kind of sort of credentials checks and things like this that people have to go through in order to meet with people who are really important and like really singular, right? And so that's a very mundane way to think about planets going into this process of meeting with the sun. I think is this is like a bit of like a stripping away process that can happen,
Hmm.
and very much I think it can be humbling. That's one of
Hmm.
the ways I think this shows up. This symbolic degree frame shows up in a natal chart, right? Is that people with planets this close to the sun, even if they're dignified, right, which can be a sort of a different situation, but I think they can have a sort of humility or sort of self-consciousness that they wouldn't necessarily if they weren't that close to the sun. And that's probably one of the most common ways and relatable ways I think of thinking with planets in this process. And I think applying is quite different than separating
Hmm.
as well. And so I think that that's just, a doctrine of application and separation more generally. It's like when we've been in this period of Venus heading into and Mars heading into this, we're in that period still, but into this meeting with the sun, and it can be so much more anxious, like in an active way. And then the after period is often like a little bit more integration. Like it can still have that kind of confusion and frustration. Um, it's like we've figured out like the reasons in terms of the superior conjunction. Say we've figured out the reasons that the laundry isn't getting done, but we have yet to come up with systems for how it's going to get done. Like that doesn't come until later. We're sort of in that process after the superior conjunction where we're like, okay, I do see like what the problem is and like what that I have to do something about it, but I don't really know how to yet. I'm just going to try some stuff and see if it
Hmm.
works. And we often don't get the clarity until Venus is visible again. But we're sort of
Hmm.
in that kind of like longer period of when she's close to the sun. It can be really uncomfortable, especially for Venus. I think
Hmm.
Mercury is much better at it, but
Hmm.
Venus is gets a little crispy, and so can a lot of our Venus topics if we know our natal chart, or ourselves if we're Venus ruled. And basically anything within her sphere can come under duress in a fairly general way.
Hmm. Right. And that's something that will be talked about often in astrology with like natal charts, like you're saying. So when people have a planet close to the sun, sometimes it's because it's not visible. It'll be said, oh, well, that may not be as visible for them, but also those topics associated could be under duress and in some type of way, especially just in terms of how they're sort of seen externally in the world. But at the same time, because the planet is going through this intense purification, these people can often have really powerful internal gifts and internal spiritual gifts and sort of internalized powerful relationships with the same planet, and that's what we'll also really experience with the transit. So like but even for
Yes.
those natal people, for example, like because it can be confusing because you'll read that like, oh, the planet is going to be harmed or the planet's not going to be seen in the world, but there's a huge list of people that are really famous for various things and are incredibly visible in the world who are visible for the exact meanings of a planet that is combust the sun. So you actually
Yeah.
see that all the time. And I think there's something there about these internal gifts and abilities to come into a powerful relationship which with that planet that can still be coming out and be visible in the world if in case someone watching this has a planet like that. I have, for example, my Jupiter is in Pisces. My sun's applying to a conjunction with Jupiter in Pisces. So that conjunction hasn't quite happened yet in my chart. The sun is coming to Jupiter, and I definitely feel like there's been things about working on becoming more visible for Jupiterian things with me. But then, for example, this exact process with these cycles I've just always been fascinated by, and periods of liminality and mystery initiations and things that probably speaks to the fact that I sort of have that symbolized, in my chart. But to your point, as we're going through that and the planet's getting closer and closer, especially to that range of getting within a degree of the sun, like we've been in this week, it can be uncomfortable, right? Because we can have this self-awareness, you could say humility, but also even looking back like, oh, I don't like this about
Mm.
myself, or I don't like this
Yeah,
particular
totally.
pattern, or I want to change this about myself. But because the planet's being purified and reborn, we have an opportunity at these times of the cycle for a rebirth, right? And really changing these patterns in some pretty powerful ways.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those situations in which you don't necessarily see when a planet is this close to the sun, you don't necessarily see the fruits of the labor immediately, right? And I think that's something that can happen with planets that are close to the sun too. They can age well, right? And I think that partially it can come with some like compensation too. And I think a lot
Mhm.
of people who you're speaking about who tend to become known for that are known for topics of the planet who is close to the sun. It tends to be yeah, a balance of things that are things that are sort of compensated for and pursued because of a felt lack, right? But then also there can be this thing that happens where people are just sort of like blissfully or attribute to others or say like attribute to God, maybe attribute to other things, gifts that they themselves
Mhm.
have, right? Attribute
Mhm.
things to their family that like are actually things that they carry as well. And I
Mhm.
think that that's something that can happen too with those solar conjunctions.
Totally. I think also just the powerful imaginal, like inner quality that can be
Mm,
cultivated through, finding ways to bring that out into the
yeah.
world. It can definitely
Yeah.
happen and then actually really come out and be
Hmm.
actually seen because
Yeah.
there's that powerful internal type of relationship.
Yeah. And have audience with the king, right? Without having to go through all those like security checks.
Exactly. So as planets approach the conjunction with the sun, there is this really powerful moment that since at least the time of Rhetorius, the Egyptian, has been given this term incardios, or being in the heart of the sun. Interestingly, this is the James Holden translation of Rhetorius. He even mentions in this that he writes, none of the ancients have made mention of this phase, but since we found it by experiment, we've added it to the list. And what he's essentially saying here is this idea that planets that are setting into invisibility or being retrograde are more inactive or uneven in their action unless they're in the heart of the sun. And he is defining that being in the heart of the sun as being within 1 degree of the sun. There's a other textual tradition that's a little bit after Rhetorius, in which like 16 or 17 minutes is given. And there's also textual evidence about that needing to not just be by longitude, but also by latitude. So they're more visually aligned. And you and I have been talking about the fact that this term Kazemi ends up getting used which doesn't even seem to be quite the right translation of the actual term in the text. And there's some interesting distinctions with this concept. So we've been talking about, for those of you that support us on Patreon, doing some extra exclusive content for our Patreon supporters to kind of nerd out more on some of those distinctions. But
Hmm.
the point being here, from this perspective of Artorias, which has become a concept, and I personally do like using this 1 degree range. I find in my lived experience of the planet being within a degree of the sun that it does feel protected, and it is not so much being in this process of being actively harmed, and that there's often these incredible insights and clarifications. Sure, 16 minutes or 17 minutes, even better, but that degree
Yeah.
range experience, I have over and over and over again, for so long at this point in my life, tracked that, and had it so consistently show up. The person who I love the most with the conception of this is the work of Demetra George. I think I first got really tuned into this on a UAC talk she did in 2012 about Mercury and Hermes as being the psychopomp and the Mercury retrograde guiding us into the underworld. And that talk was just so illuminating for me. And I feel like so much of my own work just got ran with that idea. And I really love in her ancient astrology book how she sets this up as being like a mystery initiation. And that type of process of being guided into this underworld mystery initiation of some sort, when you're in this really liminal process of coming in on one side with the planet like disappearing from view and then getting closer and closer to the sun, and then being in that protected space at the heart of the sun as being like this sanctum sanctorum, and this seminal regeneration and impregnation of the planet, because there really can be incredible illumination and clarity really gained, even though you're still, like you're describing, you can be in this process of great purification and change, and it may not necessarily feel comfortable depending on what's going on in your life, but these moments are so powerful for this. And then this even greater rebirth occurring once that planet has the rise and emerges from the womb.
I love this. I love this so much. Ugh, blessed Demetra with all good things. Yeah, regeneration is such a beautiful concept. And like I'm a plant nerd and a soil nerd and all this stuff. And so I think about this so much. The coming Venus retrograde to me is like all about compost. Feeling
Yeah,
great. Uh,
a good
um,
point.
but I think that I also agree. I think that 1 degree is a really powerful thing. And so when I'm giving dates for people, if they want to do that like very hyper specific ritualized kind of journaling or things like that, is I'll give them the degree and I'll give them under 17 zodiacal minutes, which is a little
Hmm.
different than that arc minutes definition version. And then I will also give them a minute. But of course, when you're a nerd about visual sky astrology, it's like even when a planet is within a minute for the inner planets, like they're not necessarily transiting. People might have heard of the transit of Venus.
Mm.
There's whole Wikipedia articles and cool pictures you can go look at for the transit of
Mm.
Venus. But like that is actually that's when you actually
Hmm.
see Venus go across the sun as a little dot. And that's actually quite rare, right? In terms of Venus's cycle,
Yeah,
for
and that
that to actually happen. And so I
totally.
think there's working with this degree, which works on both a symbolic and also like this longitudinal zodiacal frame, whether or not she's above or below the sun, right? Whether or not we're bringing in latitude, I think ritually it and devotionally, it is a really powerful sphere of time, exactly in the way you're talking about in this way that
Yeah,
Demetra's talking
totally.
about.
Yeah, when
Yeah.
you bring up the Venus transit sun, that's a little bit more like the Abu Mashar and some other
Hmm.
definitions of it, or like Al-Biruni. And we had that in 2004 and 2012
12,
with
yeah.
the in June of 2004 and 2012 with the Venus retrograde in Gemini, because Venus's
Mm.
planetary nodes are in Gemini and
Mhm.
Sagittarius. And so I was really lucky in June of 2012. I just stopped off at this favorite wildlife refuge of mine to take a walk because I knew the Venus conjunction was happening at that moment. And this guy in the parking lot had a telescope out, and I got to actually look through it and see this little dot of Venus.
Oh, so
Because
cool.
that's, that's the would be like I guess the absolute technical, like in the heart, like because it's
Yeah,
you can really
absolutely.
actually see Venus
Mm-hmm.
moving across the face of the sun.
Mm. Mm. That's so juicy.
And really, honestly, so much about my
No
life
wonder I like you.
completely changed. I got like a house this right immediately after that, which is, and then I don't know, within a couple of months of that, I started my website blog and writing about astrology in that kind of way, all right,
Oh,
following that
Venus
actually.
provides.
Yeah. But with this, there's one other thing I was going to bring up just because it goes with this. So there's also this idea, also from Arcturus, about chariots, and that a planet in its own domicile, its own sign, or its own exaltation, which is what Mars is exalted in Capricorn right now, that they will rejoice in, and as well as in their own bounds or terms, that they will rejoice in these places even when they are under the beams of the sun, for the benefics increase their good and the malefics are changed into a good influence. And this is sort of like this idea that the planet is in like this covered chariot, so they're kind of protected a bit from the rays of the sun. That's technically what I have in my chart with that example of like the sun conjunct Jupiter and in Pisces. And there is nuance to this though, because even in that situation, we could say perhaps the planet has greater protection even beyond just being within that sacred chamber. But the planet is still undergoing this type of transformation and change and purification. But because right now Venus is in her own bounds and Mars is exalted, and so they are both in this. They have this combination going on where they're both in their chariot. So I do feel like this. It's another reason why this is such a powerful moment, and doing things like your workshop
Mhm.
or any type of journaling that you can do at really digging into this right now is just so powerful. And it's also so extremely powerful for this beginning of the Venus and Mars cycle. And I know that's something that you'd like to talk more about.
Yeah, I think one very brief thing, and we're not going to get into all of this, but I do think it can be interesting to think back to 2018
Hmm.
which was the last superior conjunction of the Sun and Venus in Capricorn, and Saturn had just moved into Capricorn, like near that solstice, and it's just so different. And Mars wasn't there too, and so it's just like so, yeah, and it's just so different to have Saturn in like a Jupiterian Venusian sign, ruling this one in this sextile aspect by sign. Um, it's just there's so many ways that this specific conjunction between these three right now is honestly like more productive. It's like things are still uncomfortable and obviously horrible things are still happening. But there is a way that there's traction, like if there's changes that people want to be making right now, even if that it's really slow and steady progress again, like it's still Capricorn, like it's still Saturn we're working with here. Um, there's a little bit more traction to be had here, I think, than in every single Venus Sun conjunction in Capricorn.
Yeah, so what you're talking about there, though, with 2018 is that was 8 years ago. So this is connecting to that incredible Venus rose star pattern that is so powerful, where every 8 years Venus will have a conjunction in a similar degree at an exact similar time period. So almost exactly 8 years ago, in January of 2018. Yeah, that was the last time there was a superior conjunction in Capricorn, like we're having just now. And that one was actually combined with Pluto,
Oh,
But
right. Yeah,
you
Pluto.
could keep going back. Yeah, there is like within a degree of Pluto. You could keep going 8 years back. So that is something that people can also think about, that Venus star pattern with this. So thinking about January of 2018, January of 2010, January of 2002,
Hmm.
and January of 1994, and keep
Well,
going.
January of 1994, we should actually bring up.
You want me to show that chart?
Yeah.
So here's the chart for
Mm.
January of 2018 that we were just mentioning, which this is the last time there was a superior conjunction
Oh, yeah.
in Capricorn. There would have, every 2022, there would have been a Venus retrograde inferior conjunction in Capricorn, where this is the last time there is a superior conjunction. You can see really close to Pluto. But then if you go all the way back to 1994, which lines up with the 32-year cycle of Venus and Mars, that's the last time we had Venus superior conjunction in Capricorn with Mars also nearby in Capricorn. And that was also the same year as the Uranus Neptune conjunction, which is pretty incredible because right now we have the first waxing sextile aspect between Uranus and Neptune, and so much of what's going on right now is being seeded by this 1994 Uranus Neptune time period. And you can see this one was really powerful too because they're all so close together. But even this one is not quite as exact. We don't have the all three of them. That's what's so powerful about this one with them all at the exact same. But yeah, you
Yeah,
wanted
I
to
love
talk
that.
to about the
Oh, man.
people born at this time.
Yeah, if there's anyone born in this 1994 period who has all these together, like so close together, I would love to know how you're experiencing this current 2026 one. Yeah, definitely, because it is these kinds of repetitions are so wondrous, and being tied into these being especially with this Capricorn cohort with the Uranus, Neptune, and Capricorn,
Yeah.
um, so many of them are like I'm a little bit earlier. So many of them are just being called into the moment that we're having right now, in often uncomfortable but also really beautiful and powerful ways. And I have a feeling that this conjunction, this triple conjunction that's happening, will many paths will be being made clear right now for that
Yeah.
for that generation.
Absolutely. I've met with some people with consultations
Hmm.
like that.
Yeah,
So like, yeah,
same.
even if you're not specifically born at this exact time in
Yeah.
1994, if you just have this early
Hmm.
90s, mid 90s Uranus Neptune combination, you
Hmm.
have like Venus there in Capricorn with them, or Mars, or whatever else that might be lining up with this, it's going to be really
Yeah.
powerful for you.
Hmm. Agreed.
So with the Venus cycle we're in, that's just starting right now. This is actually just giving some dates to show the at the top the 15-degree range, and so how long it actually takes. Now, this is showing that around November 5th, Venus moved within that 15-degree range. January 6th, we just had the reanimation, and then March 9th will be when Venus gets 15 degrees beyond. Now, likely Venus will be visible before that, but that's just
Yeah.
showing that 15-degree range of getting out of that symbolic idealized range. And then eventually later in the year, Venus will be an evening star, start get up to that greatest height at max elongation, August 15th, station retrograde on October 3rd. That's not the 15-degree range date. That's just stationing retrograde. Will then move within 15 degrees eventually, reanimated October 24th, come out of that 15-degree range, and then station direct on November 13th. And then eventually get to the next max elongation as morning star at the beginning of 2027 on January 3rd. But paying attention to these max elongations are also just really powerful. And I know that's something that you also pay attention to. Is there anything you'd like to say about that?
Mm. I mean, I guess the one thing, because we're bringing up the retrograde, is I tend to think that the retrograde stories, not the technical retrograde, but the retrograde stories tend to begin with that greatest elongation or maximum elongation as an evening star, especially if it's happening in the same sign that she stations retrograde at, which isn't always.
Mm,
Sometimes she can move by then, but
hmm.
often she slows down enough and she's early enough in the sign that if, especially if they happen at the same time, yeah, those greatest elongations, they're just always so powerful. Like, who has not been watching a sunset and someone says, "Who's that bright star?" And any astrologer who knows is
Yeah.
unable to resist saying, "That's Venus." And it blows people's
Yeah.
minds.
And one of the amazing things about her cycle too is hitting that point, and as she keeps coming to that retrograde, it's like she's coming closer and closer to
Oh,
us, and she's getting brighter and
yeah.
brighter, and it's just like she's so bright and like just takes
Yeah.
command, takes center stage.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Wild. Just wild. Yeah, I love it. Their Venus retrogrades are so flashy and special.
So I was going to just show that if people want to think about, we're talking about this particular superior conjunction. We were just mentioning, the last time we had a Capricorn one, but when we just look at that cycle to have moved through the superior conjunction, through the retrograde, and back to the one we're in now, the last time we had a superior conjunction, just period, in the Venus cycle was June 4th of 2024. So since that one, we had this insemination, reanimation of a new Venus cycle here. So especially on the superior conjunction side, personal storylines, this is definitely a period to think about the last time we went through this
Yeah.
phase of the Venus cycle that then eventually took us through that incredibly powerful retrograde phase earlier in 2025 and in March and March 22nd specifically, we had the inferior conjunction of Venus with the Sun. This one was extremely powerful for numerous reasons. And actually, with that exclusive content with Patreon, we'll talk about this is what the one that was interesting because Venus was such a high latitude. She was really visible as a morning star and evening star at the same time. Like it's just a really unique one for her. But this is another period where, and there are some astrologers that like to focus on this being the beginning of the Venus cycle. Either way, they're both really powerful rebirths. So there definitely could be important stories that we're related to right now that go back to June of 2024,
Mhm.
and also that have some kind of start and change and rebirth connected back to March of 2025 into April of 2025. And that could all be part of what's really coming up for you right now as this new cycle starts up.
And then thinking about, so it's like the June 2024 to the March 2025 to now
Hmm.
to then the October
Hmm.
2026. That's kind of the next hop, right?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, that October one will be like the March one we were just talking about.
Yeah.
So then do you want to look at Mars real quick and then a Venus Mars cycle?
Yeah, Venus Mars cycle.
Just to give Mars a little bit of attention in the same way,
Yeah.
not to neglect
Not as much
Mars like
though.
we always do. Mars is used to it with Venus,
Same.
but the January 9th will be the beginning of this cycle, which you can see is like Venus is just barely separating from Mars and the Sun at this point. In this particular Mars cycle, goes back to November 18th of 2023. So with Mars, there was this new Mars cycle beginning then in Scorpio. This is a really powerful one because Mars, it began in Scorpio. Mars became visible in Capricorn. There were countless astrological talismans made during that time period.
Right.
It was a really powerful Mars cycle that came in here, and this then led into at this time last year. Remember, we went through the big Mars retrograde in Leo and Cancer.
Cancer.
And now we've come back around to the beginning of this cycle. So what's so powerful about this is that all of this great change that we're talking about with Venus and Mars and them going through this purification, sort of death and rebirth, and they're in this mystery initiation. We have this whole ability to re it just adds into this ability that you were talking about going deep within about what's happening with your own internal values, what you want to create, what you really truly desire, really allowing the past and past patterns, past identities to burn off, really connect with that inner desire and value system. And how is that actually aligning with your actions and what you're here to do? And this is all going to go into this whole new Venus Mars cycle that's starting up right now.
Yeah, and definitely, and thinking about the Mars being renewed in Capricorn in exaltation, about to also be in charge of the Saturn Neptune conjunction in Aries, I think is really a strong way. Like just that's a potent Mars. I mean, it's similar to the Mars being renewed in Scorpio, right? Um, and we've seen the events that have happened since that Mars got renewed. So I think it's something to think about as we're looking ahead into these broader cycles and broader world events too. And
Yeah,
the
totally.
the Venus being here, I think on a personal level, both sort of softens it a little bit, but as well, like Venus Mars conjunctions, even when they're not conjunct the sun, are they can be pokey, right? They can definitely be moments that we're faced with situations that test our values, that test our mettle, that test ourselves, right? And that test our relationships too, especially. And so I think that that's here on kind of like a whole other level with the sun being here.
And testing the metal, like you're saying, that really goes with the type of adversity and testing we get with Mars and Saturn, which are
Yeah.
that's the reason they're considered the traditional malefic planets. So something else about this, which is really important, is the last Mars conjunction we just looked at was in Scorpio. So that was Mars in its own sign. Mars was obviously
Yeah.
ruling it. The last Venus Sun conjunction we had, that retrograde, was in
Yeah,
Aries.
yeah,
It was ruled by Mars. This one, they're both having it in Capricorn, ruled by
yeah.
Saturn.
Mhm.
The next one Venus has in October is in Scorpio. It's the
Yeah.
final one she'll have in Scorpio, actually, in our
Finally.
this whole since like the 20s, the 1930 or something.
Yeah.
But that's also ruled by Mars. So we are in a sequence right now of Saturn and Mars ruling these like sequenced conjunctions. We've just had a whole both the last Mars, the last Venus were both in Mars signs. This one's in Saturn
Mhm.
sign. The next Venus one is in a Mars sign. So it's absolutely, I think that really further amplifies what you were just saying, that there is this time of like great testing. And this is a time to really dig deep about what you truly, yeah, value and like everything you're saying, and really aligning action with that, and the need that there's going to be a necessity of being very courageous.
Yeah, and what you're able and willing to do, I think, is really what um, the Venus-Mars cycle reminds us of so often. Because I think the will to do something, sure, it's partially a Mars thing, but when you care about something, when you're
Mm-hmm.
related with something, Venus is in there, right? Venus is the
Mm-hmm.
one doing that work, bringing that together. And so being able to understand, like, what actions you're willing to take, like what limits are you setting for yourself, which is part of the Saturn, right? And like what expectations do we have of other people, or like where are we softening in order to facilitate relationships continuing out of necessity in part, right? I think that all those questions are happening right now, and it being facilitating our capacity for courage and curiosity is so much of what so many of the cycles are speaking to generally and have for like 2 years. So I think that
Mm-hmm.
and Jupiter in Cancer is here sort of supporting this, although,
Mm-hmm.
part of the challenge, I think, for sure, is Jupiter being in conversation with this as well. But when they're in this conjunction with each other, they're both still applying into that opposition with Jupiter. And so
Mm-hmm.
thinking about this balance between like, what we wish was happening on a collective level, right? On a law, on a justice level, and then thinking about how our own values and our own actions fit into that, whether or not those ideals ever actually happen. I think
Mm.
is a very helpful way to think about and placing ourselves within the collective version of this transit.
Yeah, and I think with that opposition to Jupiter, and Jupiter's in that curtailed passage of like that midnight Jupiter, like you
Yeah,
were saying, where Jupiter's like the brightest at night.
yeah.
And there is something about this all feeding into this new sense of Jupiterian, calling and purpose and role we can play in the world right now too. So I think can be helpful. I really like what you're saying too. That to me was also really speaking to the aspect of Venus being in her bounds and this how happening in her bounds. So she's sort of able
Yeah,
to set those terms like you're describing.
yeah,
And the Saturn Neptune, although that's so disorienting for people right now, and we can feel how things are just completely changing and people's sense of reality changing, it creates the opportunity for powerful change. I mean, that's what I just keep hoping with it and believing in. And this is a type of thing where, yeah, like you're saying, just really starting with what you can change within yourself and really digging into this. And what's so powerful is that this new cycle of Venus and Mars, it just goes across the year ahead in so many powerful alignments with Venus coming into phases with the rest of the astrology happening. So, with the rest of this, we're just going to run through some of this. So, obviously, here again, we have this big new cycle of them starting up. We're still going to be feeling into this like the rest of January. They won't be visible the rest of January. And eventually, after a lot happens in the world, they will come into their first sextile aspect on May 19th, with Mars having recently entered Taurus the day before and Venus having recently entered Cancer the day before. The moon will actually be there with Venus. And this really struck me because even if this is just has if you look at the year of astrology, this particular day just stands out because the previous period of time of Mars being in Aries with Saturn and Neptune just looks like that's probably a really dramatic time period. And then the period of Venus coming into Cancer to be there with Jupiter looks like one of the uh, better, more in the terms of pleasant, and maybe we can kind of regroup and have a better time with things time periods of the year. And so it's really interesting. Yeah, is that what do you see with that with them coming into the sextile right here as we enter that time period?
Yeah, I mean, one of the gnarly bits before this is Mars, Saturn, and Aries, right? And so getting these malefics into a version of each other feels very nice. And having Venus suddenly in charge of this Mars, as well as in this aspect with the moon right there and Jupiter right there supporting her, feels really lovely
Hmm.
in comparison, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And so this will be an interesting time where, there'll be a lot going on with your relationship with Venus and Mars that will be happening before we get to this point. But we can think about this being a really interesting check-in point and sort of integration moment related to their cycle and what you might be thinking about right now. And it will lead into a nice period of Venus getting closer and closer to Jupiter and them coming together in the first week of June,
Yeah,
which can
this will be a
hopefully be really helpful for people. Yeah.
Yeah, this will be a beautiful moment in the sky as well, because
Hmm.
this is just a crescent moon, right?
Right.
Waxing. So Venus and Jupiter will also be visible up there after sunset. Yeah,
Yeah.
so this is a probably maybe even better the next night. So Wednesday night, May 20th,
Mm.
2026. This would be a good night to watch the sunset.
Yeah. And even the day before would probably you could probably get
Yeah,
looking
that's true.
like the crescent moon
The
kind of
barely
coming
crescent. Yeah, yeah,
towards Venus. Yeah. But yeah,
yeah.
all these days,
Agreed.
yeah, totally. It would be beautiful. Then this leads into the first square. And what's so powerful about this Venus cycle is that they're going to keep doing this where they get to a square, then they get to a sextile, they get to a square, they come back to a sextile, they go back to a square, they come back to a sextile. So it takes them a while to really fully get out of this opening square. So this will be at 2122 Gemini and Virgo, with Mars about 2122 Gemini, Venus at 2122 Virgo. They're both in signs of Mercury. Um,
And this is the Jupiter Sun conjunction too, right in the middle between
it's
them.
it's right at the exact yes. The same thing we're talking about with Venus and Mars right now. This is what we'll be going through with Jupiter right here, which will be we're right at this moment of Jupiter being purified and this new sense of Jupiter coming in. And there is this full moon on this same day, opposing the Sun and Jupiter, forming a conjunction with Pluto. And this also happens to be this period of this really powerful
Mhm.
cradle, cauldron, basket configuration of Pluto, Neptune, Uranus, and Jupiter all forming these exact aspects with the full moon lighting it up.
Mhm.
This July 29th Aquarius full moon just looks like this really peak moment of the year. And it's incredible to me that it's the exact same time that we hit the Venus Mars opening square. So this is one of the reasons why we can just see this Venus Mars cycle right now. The more you can kind of clarify this, right, and do this alignment like you're talking about,
Yeah,
hopefully it can
precisely.
help you get on the track for where this we're going with this. Yeah.
Yeah, because this is when they get tested, right? This
Right.
is when those actions get tested and or called for. This looks a little bit more like testing than being called on to me, but they can happen at
Yeah.
the same time. Um, but with that Venus and Virgo, I mean, with that Mercury in Cancer is not doing too bad. So I think that Venus will be able to hold her own with this in this Venus Mars square. But yeah, we won't be getting too much help from Jupiter outside of maybe some more like visioning. The sun is very loud right here. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, this is a full moon.
Yeah. At least we say the sun's receiving Jupiter here into the domicile. But
Hmm.
yeah, I think the testing is a good point. There's it's probably a time period of a lot of big fast moving changes and events, and there could be a lot of excitement with this, but we're definitely going to
Yeah,
be tested here with this square.
yeah.
Then we go through a bunch of other stuff, but eventually in early October, Venus will be in Scorpio, slowing down, and will station retrograde on October 3rd in Scorpio in the sign of Mars,
Yeah.
with Mars coming towards a square with Venus in Leo. Mars exactly opposite Pluto. This looks like a very dramatic opening to the Venus retrograde. I
Hmm.
think you were bringing up compost earlier.
Oh yeah.
Could be
That's part
something
of this.
real extreme
Well,
here.
there's like, there's certain kinds of compost that when you're doing, there's different kinds of compost. And so one of them is hot compost, right? That purifies like all of the bacteria that you don't want in there. And that's one of the ways. But so there's this situation where lots of people are very well-meaning people put these compost bins in their backyard and have them close to their houses because they are because it's more convenient, but then they get so hot that if they're not set up properly, they can actually light on fire. And so there's a way that this kind of looks like that a little bit to me. It's like very like Jupiter in Leo here is our well-intentioned action with Mars there too, but then with Venus in Scorpio there and Mars in that overcoming position, and we'll get to that next aspect between them, but it's potentially volatile.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so Venus stationing, we get this big intensification of Venus, and then basically we have this week where that square is just building, and it is an overcoming square of Mars,
Because Venus
overcoming
is like
Venus
still here, basically. Like Venus just stays in one spot
stays right
as
there.
far as
Yeah,
zodiacal longitude goes. Yeah.
yeah, and it'll be on October 10th that we get to the exact square. So at this point, Venus is still visible. So we're still in that
Hmm.
early phase of the Venus retrograde. but we're definitely in the opening process
The sun is
of
catching
the
up fast.
yep, yeah. And this is a really powerful new moon in Libra right here too that
Mm.
comes in right here, um, which will then have that crescent contact with Venus that you track with your Patreon.
Mhm.
So yeah, so what's really powerful is that we have this square come back at the beginning of the Venus retrograde. Then we get the next Venus Sun. So this is that inferior mystery initiation of Venus being in between us and the Sun, as close as Venus gets. First degree of Scorpio, and this happens to be the final Venus Sun conjunction in Scorpio that we get for a really long time. It's a sequence that began back in like 1926 and 1930 were like the time periods where that was coming in. I think it goes back to 1926 was the first one. It's definitely in that general time period. And the last one we had in 2022 was in Libra. That was the Venus superior conjunction in October 2022. Was the first one in Libra. The next time we have a retrograde at this place of the Venus cycle, the Venus Sun conjunction will be in Libra. So we have this like Venus
Yes.
star point pattern shifting into Libra, but we're not there yet. This is like the finale of the Scorpio one.
Yeah.
And it seems like, yeah, it just couldn't come at a more dramatic time, honestly.
Hmm.
And so that will happen in the middle of this. So it's still ruled by Mars, like we were just talking about. Then we come into another sextile. So this is on November 10th, only 3 days before Venus stations direct. So she's just about to station direct. We're already going to be feeling the intensity of her stationing. She's already become visible, and we get Mars square. I mean, sorry, Venus, Mars sextile Venus with Mars combined with Jupiter in the south
Hmm.
node. So there's also like a Venus sextile Jupiter that's coming in right before this. So it's quite powerful. It's a really dramatic stationing of Venus with this aspect. Yeah.
Yes, yes, it is.
And
Yeah.
so like,
Mm.
yeah, like,
Mm.
again, just
That
really
Venus
point
is potent, though. That Venus is powerful in like
powerful.
good Venusian ways here.
Mm,
There's some rising happening here for sure in like a general world kind of way. Um,
yeah,
yeah. I mean,
you'd think
that
so.
station direct, I think, specifically like less so this aspect, but the station direct, I think, is a very despite what she faces by
Yeah.
Saturn and Aries, there's
Yeah.
something here.
Definitely. Yeah. So something really emerging powerful out of this Venus retrograde. So I am hopeful about that potential, yeah, for everybody personally of what can come out on the other side. It looks personally like really um much more challenging with the adversity at the beginning
Hmm.
and then something super powerful emerging at the end.
Yeah.
But again, we can just see how powerful this cycle is with them continuing to line
Yeah,
up
and the
like
fact that
this.
it's in conversation with the Mars Jupiter South Node, I think is
Mm-hmm.
like is really it's like this is like rising in response to, right? It's not just like Venus rising from her the surf, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like she's, Venus, Aphrodite is born from that by a lot of blood happening. So,
Yeah, and the morning star phase is more assertive, going after things, striking
hmm.
out, and that
Yeah.
Mars Jupiter combination it definitely has huge, firepower and fire and
Yeah.
boldness. And
Hmm.
the combination with the South Node, yeah, it feels
Hmm.
like it could be helpful though with especially if this Venus retrograde has been helpful for like stripping things away and purifying
Totally.
things. Hopefully that can all come together here to really hone in on this essential,
Yeah. My
yeah.
very boring, mundane prediction for the Venus retrograde is that people are going to get back into decluttering during this one.
Totally, it could happen for
Maybe
sure.
Marie Kondo is going to put out a new book or a new season of
Mm.
her show or something.
Yeah, and interestingly, it's again right after another new moon with like a waxing
Hmm.
new moon here, like that last one. Then, within a month, December 12th, we are back to another sextile because Venus will be moving forward, coming to Scorpio, catching up to Mars. So we get another sextile, the third one. And at this point, Mars will be starting to slow down in Virgo because a month later, on January 10th, Mars will station retrograde in Virgo with Venus and Sagittarius coming towards Mars, which means
Oh,
January 16th we get another
another
square.
one.
And so both the Venus retrograde and the Mars retrograde, they both open with these like square aspects coming in. So yeah, it just really speaks to how powerful this cycle is going to be.
Yeah, it feels so edgy. It's like it's
Yeah.
very will they, won't they? Or it's very like they do and then they don't, and then they do and then they don't. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, so there really could be something that's being wrangled with across this whole thing.
Hmm.
Um, which again is why what you can do for now is you just get the most out of this alignment we have right now to get
Hmm.
ready for
Ground
what's
in.
coming. Ground
Yeah,
in,
for
yeah.
sure. It's
Hmm.
like there's I like thinking about one thing I've been assigning people after sessions is thinking about their non-negotiables. And I think
Hmm.
that's a very helpful thing to think of throughout this whole
Yeah.
period of these planets in Capricorn. Um, and while Saturn is still in these last bounds of in these last degrees of Pisces too, and because there is something about like thinking of one Saturn in Pisces thing I've been thinking about a lot is thinking about our oaths, right? Like the ones
Hmm.
we're carried into, the ones we make knowingly, the ones we make unknowingly. And Saturn in Pisces has been a lot about wrangling with those, I think, for people. And that can work on any level from ancestral things we're born into to jobs we're in to relationships we're in to the nations we're part of. This is like thinking about these oaths. And so I think the Capricorn aspect of this, bringing in that influence, and I mean that's part of the Neptune process too, in terms of like thinking about how those exist in culture. And the Capricorn piece of this is like thinking about those non-negotiables and releasing what ones like that don't actually work in your life anymore
Hmm.
that either aren't tenable or aren't preferable or aren't compatible in your relationships or in the kind of life you want to live. And I think there's like abandoning of certain proclivities, like seeing people abandon consumerism, is abandoning social media and these like corporate apps, right? It's like there's a lot of this is happening, and this is part of that purification process that, yes, of course, happens on an individual level, but is their gestures and their movements towards collective movement. And I think seeing this Venus sextile square for the next year really shows it's like moments that's working and moments that gets challenged. And I think that's a really helpful way to frame it.
Yeah, I really like the getting clear with the non-negotiables. That's a great practice. And to your point, yeah, as you just said, it's we can see here it means there's like a whole year ahead of it's gonna take a whole year for them to actually get out of this opening square. They're just gonna keep going back square, sextile, and then we go through the rest of them quickly. Then February 7th, we finally get to a trine with Mars retrograde in Virgo, with Venus back in Capricorn. At that point, we then come into this really powerful tension of the opposites on March 19th of 2027, right before the Aries equinox and the Aries ingress of the sun coming into Aries, with Venus at 22 Aquarius with the north node of the moon and Mars, the moon, the south node, Jupiter all together there in Leo. This looks really powerful. Again, and another definite moment of testing, like you're talking about. Then Mars stations direct on April 1st, like another big key moment with the South Node with Jupiter. And then on May 14th of 2027, we'll get Venus coming into Taurus with Chiron in Taurus. and trining Mars in Virgo. So this is going to be a big moment for the Chiron and Taurus people for sure, but that's May 14th. And then on June 23rd of 2027, we get Venus and Gemini square Mars in Virgo. And then on, amazingly to me, August 7th of 2027, just as we're heading to the next superior conjunction of Venus and Leo, is when we get the next sextile between them. So Venus will be not quite in the degree of the sun here, but getting close, like she's heading into it. So this looks really extremely powerful. And then they ultimately come together again, November 24th, 2027, in the final degree of Sagittarius. So that's where we're headed with this whole cycle.
Mm, mm. Yeah, that feels like a ways away. And I also looking at that, like seeing Saturn just at 21 degrees Aries by that point, I'm like, that's gonna happen so fast.
Yeah, totally.
Once Saturn gets into Aries, it's all gonna speed up.
So yeah, thank you so much for going through all this with me, and it was fun to fly through all those Venus Mars dates there at the end.
Yeah.
It's so much is going to be changing, but we hopefully you can get a sense from that, like how powerful this upcoming Venus Mars cycle is, and so this moment of inception right now is so powerful and potent. And yeah, if people, I'll put a link below so people can sign up for your workshop and get information
Hmm.
about that.
Yeah, if folks are interested in a low-key way of tracking this whole Venus cycle, which of course we'll be talking about the Mars-Venus aspects as we're going through it, but I have a tier on my Patreon that's for monthly Moon-Venus conjunction cycle worksheets. So during those periods where Venus is a morning star or an evening star, she makes these monthly conjunctions with the sun, or monthly conjunctions with the moon. And they're just really beautiful moments to track and relate with. And they kind of they make more tangible because you can literally see them in the sky. They make more tangible these like giant movements of Venus that are really powerful to relate to, but can be a challenge to get in your head. And so tracking the Moon Venus conjunctions helps really get them in your body
Mm,
and get you relating with them like through time and just casually through your life. So there is a tier on my Patreon for that, which I have not even announced yet. So this is
okay,
the
that's
first place
special.
people are learning about it.
Awesome. Are you doing consultations with people right now?
I do consultations about twice a year. I
I
open my
see. Okay.
calendar, and so I do have a mailing list for that on my
Okay.
website, nineofwands.com. Sometimes I'll do little like pop-up fundraisers or something like that, but for the most part, I just do like one in the winter and
Okay.
one in the summer.
Well, I know you're also going to speak at NORWAC in
Hmm.
May, so I'll put a link
Hmm.
to that below. And
Cool.
you
Yeah.
are also going to be speaking like me at UAC
You
in
are.
Chicago in
Yeah.
September. So I can put a link below to that if people want to come hang out with us in Chicago and hear both of us
Yeah, and there's
give a
still
talk.
scholarships for UAC as of recording this. So applying for scholarships for folks who want to come but might struggle to make the conference fee and banquet and stuff work is a really good thing to do too.
Cool.
Yeah.
And as for me, my books are open right now for consultation, so people can contact me there, and I'll put a link for that in my Patreon as well. And it was occurring to me as we are going through this that I did a NORWAC talk in 2021 on heliacal rising and setting planets. It kind of goes
Cool.
into the same thing that we're talking about and gives you a sense of the rising and the setting and that liminal process we were going through. So I'll put a link to that below too as well. If people want to check that
Awesome.
out. But yeah,
Thanks, Gray. Good to see
thank you so
you.
much for being here with me.